the United States of America.
Views expressed on this show do not
Unity
necessarily
and
reflect those of
oneness is what
ActsMinistry
we're
Media
made
Group
of.
and their affiliates.
One
or
nation
sponsors.
under God, it's plain to see. We're showing the whole world what a country should be. United we stand in America, hand in hand in America. Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
Good morning, everyone out there. Welcome to Changing Times. It is Wednesday, March the 19th. Tomorrow will be the first day of spring. It's not going to seem like that here in Springfield, Missouri. We are live at Acts Media Group headquarters. Tomorrow may have a little snow, but it is getting nicer and nicer every day, so spring is closer. Today we have a great show. This actually may be one of the best educational shows. This is show number 198. We do social issues and social causes. I'm Lynn Morris.
And I'm Dr. Mary Byrne.
Yes, you are. And I tell you what, we have two great guests today. They are both difference makers. We have absolutely all difference makers on our show, and they are going to educate. And people, you need to pay attention. And when you watch this show today, we got people from all over the country and around the world. When you watch this show today, please share this. You can share this with your friends and family. You need to educate and know what's going on in this world, okay? And I'm going to let both ladies, we have Sara Effner, Miss Sara Effner, and we have Miss WenChen, and both of them are tremendous ladies. And I've actually known Sara for, well, since about 2016. I think I met you as a state representative up in Jefferson City. And Sara, I'm going to let you just do a little bit of short bio of yourself to tell our audience who you are and what you're doing, and then when I'm going to have you do. And then we're going to just jump right in. We've got some great questions for you all to help explain why we're doing this very important show. So Sara, what do we need to know about you?
Good morning. Yes, I grew up in a little town of Jamestown, Missouri, sort of in the central north of Jefferson City. And a lot of how I got interested in the Falun Gong issue and the persecution in China and the harvesting. But after college, I actually went to China to study the language, and my father studied medicine. So I actually saw when the persecution of this meditation started, I saw the footage, the propaganda by the state-run media in China, and that really woke me up to what was going on, and I learned more about it when I came back to the United States. But I'm currently living in Rock, and I own and operate a small business back in my hometown, and my husband teaches at the University of Missouri in science and technology, and besides those things, I try to raise awareness. When I met you years ago, that was the beginning of great things that we've done in Missouri that I'd like to share about later.
Well, very good. I tell you what, and when you talk about Falun Gong, that's a peaceful religious group. And one of the things I remember you telling me, Sara, several years ago, that group was a larger number of population in China than the Communist Party. And maybe that was one of the reasons why they were chosen as a group to be persecuted and be tortured and killed and the things that they've done, because maybe the Chinese Party was afraid of them. I don't know, but that was interesting. But I want people to know that group still today is a very peaceful group of people. And they don't deserve what they've had happen to them. Okay, Wen, a little bit about you.
Greetings from California. I live in Pasadena, California. I was born and raised in China, and I came to the United States in 1994 for graduate school. And in 2000, I got my PhD in biology. And now I have been working in the past, 25 years. I've been working as a biologist and information scientist. And besides my scientific career, I use my vacation time to speak about human rights in China and also about the Communist Party's infiltration into the United States, how they influence our media, our entertainment industry, and education system. And the reason I speak out about this is because when I came to the US in the 90s, I was a very, very brainwashed Chinese student. And I openly denied the Tiananmen massacre and everything because of the propaganda I received in China, right? Like in China, the government controlled every media and we were very, very brainwashed. And after my American friends helped me to get out of this propaganda, I realized I really need to serve the community by providing my knowledge about China. Because nowadays, when you criticize communism, whenever you talk about human rights in China, oftentimes some Americans will say, you're anti-China, you're anti-Asian, you're racist. I mean, this is unbelievable. I'm 100% ethnic Chinese, and I love Chinese culture and Chinese history. But I think we want to make the difference to correct the misunderstandings in the American society and understand how evil the Communist Party is, because they're coming to the U.S. to try to control our next generation.
Well, there's a very long history of collaboration between the Communist Chinese Party, particularly Mao Zedong, and Black Panthers and revolutionaries here in this country. They actually received funding from the Chinese Communist Party to create dissonance and violence, to tell you the truth, on college campuses. In the 60s, there was a huge infiltration into the university system by Marxists, and Mao being the Chinese apologist for Marxism, and Marcuse being from Germany, introducing his version of neo-Marxism. That was a person from the Frankfurt School in Germany, came over here during World War II, but was active in university teaching. So those two influences converged, and a lot of that rioting and dishevelment in our society in the 60s was Marx, Marcuse, and Mao. So that never really went away. Actually, Black Lives Matter receives funding. You don't hear much of them anymore. But in 2020, during that year with the election, Black Lives Matter received funding from the Chinese Communist Party because that's the plan, is to level American society and introduce a world culture that, from the Maoist perspective, even with Xi Jinping, it would be a Chinese version of communism that would go worldwide. So it's very important to understand the actions and the agenda of the Chinese Communist Party, because that's what they want to bring here. And I really appreciate you speaking out about this. So let's
Very
get back
good.
to Sara.
Yeah, so Sara, our first part of this program, I want people to understand, you and I met up in Jefferson City, and we had a resolution. You were looking for someone to file a resolution, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a House bill that's been filed this year, and we'll talk about it. But so tell the folks, I mean, this resolution asks the United States to condemn China for the persecution and the illegal organ harvesting. People, I mean, in our country, we have an organ transplant program. You have voluntary people all over this country, United States, that want to donate organs, and they have an organ little card that they carry in their billfold. If they have an accident or die or whatever, they can actually donate an organ to keep someone else alive. And we have a network, and a transportation network, and a hospital network, and we have that. But still yet, in China, they have none of that. They don't ask people to volunteer and donate organs. They built buildings after buildings, hospitals after hospitals. It's a big industry. And what they've done is they kidnap people. People just disappear off the streets. And then the next thing you know, they're in a hospital somewhere and they're being kept alive and organs are being taken out to sold to someone in this world. That's why I wanted to make sure that people understand. Be careful if you need an organ transplant, be careful where you get them, because you may be taking an organ from someone else that did not intend to donate that organ. They were taken while they were alive. And I think that is atrocious. So a little bit about the resolution, how we got that passed, and then a little bit about the bill.
Yeah, so the resolution was condemning the Chinese Communist Party's practice of forced organ harvesting on a mass scale against the Falun Gong and other prisoners of conscience. And we focused on Falun Gong not just because that's what we're involved in, but because it's the largest group being targeted for forced organ harvesting. And it's one of the largest group, if not the largest group of prisoners of conscience in China. Like you mentioned, Lynn, it grew to 100 million people before the persecution started. And in 1999, it was banned by the dictator, Jiang Zemin, and he said he wanted to completely eradicate this group in 3 months. And we knew that the persecution was really brutal early on because we were getting personal reports of people being tortured and forced to give up their belief in these labor camps and detention centers all across China, just countless stories. And we were collecting the death cases that we could get, but there's a lot of death cases we cannot get due to the persecution and information blockade. And then years later, in 2006, the first witnesses came forward to expose that forced organ harvesting is happening in China. Then extensive research was done to show that this is happening. And one of the things that stands out is that they started building these huge hospitals in China, and they have a certain number of beds that are used just for, they counted the hospital beds in these hospitals for transplants. So they did the estimates to determine, one of the estimates was they determined that they were doing 60,000 to 100,000 transplants in China per year, and they don't have a donation system. And that made them the second largest, second behind America, in the transplant in the world. And when you look at the timeline, before the persecution of Falun Gong began, China only did a few hundred transplants per year, and a lot of those were taken by death row prisoners. But it's hard to find death row prisoners that are healthy enough and to find a match. So back then, when they were accused of that, because we also think that's a human rights violation, the Communist Party said, oh no, it's not coming from death row prisoners. But after the persecution started and they started opening up for transplants to people from all around China going into China to get organs, and they advertised you can get an organ matched in 1 to 2 weeks. And they said, when finally these accusations came out in 2006, they said, oh no, it's not coming from Falun Gong or other prisoners of conscience. It's coming from death row prisoners, as if now that's okay. And when they did the research, they found that even if that was true at all, there's no way that there were enough matched, organs from the number of death row prisoners to match the number of transplants that they were doing. There was just no way. So there's a lot of research done, but it still took a lot of years for people to really believe, because it's such an unbelievable crime, and confirm that this is happening. So when we came to you, it was close around the same time that at the federal level they passed a resolution. But I'm going to stop there because I think there's more questions that will bring that out.
Sure. So, the governments all around the world, they deal with that. But what did the United States, what has the United States done? We did the resolution. We've got some House bills around the country. But what do you think our government has done?
Yeah, so what I was just mentioning is around the time we worked on our resolution, the U.S. government, the House of Representatives, passed a resolution condemning it. Of course, the next step is a bill, and they did pass the Falun Gong Protection Act in the House last year. It didn't quite get through the Senate, so it was reintroduced in both the House and Senate, and it's called the Falun Gong Protection Act, but it is, because it's the largest group being targeted, but it's going to punish anybody who is involved in forced organ harvesting from China. I mean, that's what the sanctions are meant to do. It took longer than we hoped to get to this point. Of course, it takes a while. Everybody who makes laws knows that. But I just want to share briefly that in Israel, years before, even I think before that resolution and came out in 2016, a doctor whose patient went to China to get a transplant. Actually, it was a heart transplant, and he scheduled it weeks in advance. And he told his doctor in Israel, and his doctor said, you can't schedule a heart transplant in advance because you don't know when that's going to be available. And then he realized he found the research that was happening at that time. And then he got a law passed saying you can't go to China for you can't use your insurance to go to China for an organ. And what was great about that is that not only did people not be able to use the insurance to go to China, but now everybody knew about it. So with a conscience, especially with the history of the Holocaust, nobody wants to go to China to get an organ knowing that there's probably over a 95% chance that it's coming from an innocent person who would not have died.
Very good. So this is really for both of you, and you can help answer the question. So, in 2019, Sarah, we did pass the resolution. And so from that time, from 2019 to 2025, I know Wen travels the country and gives talks to people and educating people. You do too. And so both of you, what do you think between those 5 years? Are we getting more people educated to the fact that we have this issue in China? Are we having success in educating people, informing people? Sarah, you first, and then Wen.
You want me to go first? Okay.
Yeah, just go ahead.
For my experience, is definitely, I mean, we did a lot of petition drives even before the resolution. And so it was the original resolution we had in Missouri was actually the will of the people. But the issue with it wasn't talking enough about organ harvesting, so it didn't raise enough awareness. So I was kind of glad we didn't go very far with that one. And then when you took over, we added a lot of the language about forced organ harvesting. And we had victims that live in Missouri, people who have been tortured in China. Some of them were even blood tested while being tortured, even though they didn't know why they were being blood tested at the time. But when they escaped to America and learned that organ harvesting was happening, they realized that they could have died from organ harvesting. These were people in Missouri testifying for that resolution. And it was so powerful that many of the representatives said that what we are doing to raise awareness about this atrocity that's happening to our community reminded them. This is actually Mike Kehoe that said that when he arranged the first hearing we had on the Senate. In the beginning, he welcomed us and he said, we reminded him of, especially the Chinese ones, of why he got into government in the first place. And I'm sure you feel the same way, Representative Morris, that to fight for freedom, right? To do these great things.
Well, you know what? Just very quickly, the word powerful. I'm glad you said that because that's what I thought back then, and I still think that today. Those witnesses that were so brave that told some of the stories that they told in our hearings that I proceeded over, I'm telling you what, that was absolutely powerful. So Wen, what's your comments on this issue?
Definitely, there was a huge change I observed. I remember when I first speak about this topic in 2016 or so, people really heard about organ harvesting. I mean, when I spoke to local community organizations like Rotary clubs, right? People said, I've never heard about it before. I never saw it reported on media. Of course, mainstream media do not want to report this because they don't want to lose the business with the Chinese government, right?
They want China's funding them. That's
they want to get the advertised money from the Chinese, entities. They wouldn't report this. And that was in 2016. And nowadays, when I speak about organ harvesting, I would say more than 50% of audience would raise their hand. Oh, I've heard about this before. Tell other people about this. Tell us more about it. So definitely, I think we see the change in our community. And I want to add to what Sarah said about the government actions in the U.S., right? So last year, besides the Falun Gong Protection Act, there was also another act called the Stop Organ Harvesting Act that was introduced in March 2023 and passed in March last March. So that was not even introduced, pushed by Falun Gong. That was like purely done by non-Falun Gong people, like, to aim at organ harvesting. So when you see this happening, you realize that, okay, like it's more than Falun Gong practitioners speaking out, like, the general public, they have been raising their voices. But unfortunately, neither bill, right, like, for Stop Organ Harvesting Act and also Falun Gong Protection Act, they were not voted in the Senate, although they were also introduced, they were not voted. So that just means we are still lack of awareness. Like, we know this is happening, but not many Americans realize this is important enough to be signed into law. That's why we have to redo this, right? Now the Falun Gong Protection Act was reintroduced in this session of Senate. And so we need to we only have 2 years to work on this. We have to get it passed. And that's why we're here, to raise more awareness, like so that people can continue to push for acts in our federal level and also the state level.
Do you think Mitch McConnell's marriage to Elaine Chao had anything to do with that? The fact that it was held up in the Senate?
I think we have something much larger scale. I remember in 2016, right, U.S. Congress passed a non-binding resolution, House Resolution 343, condemning the forced organ harvesting in China. It was just non-binding. Think about it. There was no legal power to force you not to go to China. Even for that one, it was very, very hard to pass, because the congressional office we visited told us, like, you don't know how many phone calls we got from the Chinese consulate. They came to visit us, and they have been everywhere. The Chinese government's agents are everywhere, lobbying our elected officials, even threatening them.
Yeah.
To not take
They came
action.
to Missouri too. Yeah. They came from Chicago to Missouri to tell them not to pass that resolution. But thankfully we did anyway.
Well, very good.
And they
So-
blocked a resolution. They blocked a resolution in California. California tried to pass a non-binding resolution in 2017. The Chinese consulate in San Francisco sent an email to every California Senate member asking them to block the resolution. And like Kevin DeLeon, the Senate president, he's Democrat. And so basically he blocked the resolution, and the whole California Senate voted along the party line, right? And because Democrat was super dominant, they blocked the resolution. That was just shocking when I saw this. Like, it was not even under the table. They just openly threatened or like demanded the California elected officials to block a resolution against forced organ harvesting in China. And the California elected officials blocked it, following the Chinese consulate's order.
Well, that's too bad, so I think the bottom line for people to understand is that you all and everybody has made a lot of progress. We still have a lot more work to do. That's why people like you two, difference makers, are making the difference and informing and educating the world about what's going on. So Sarah, our last question, and then you'll be able to chime in anytime you want to, but let's just talk real quick about the House bill. I know they're on spring recess right now, and we thought we might get them on, but I didn't really want to share your time with the bill sponsor. If that bill makes it through at least one committee and gets to the second committee before it gets on the floor, I'd like to invite you guys back on, and we'll talk about that bill. We'll see how far it gets, because we know that sometimes it takes several years to get a bill through everything.
Oh,
So,
that's modus operandi.
That's right.
I
I
was
mean,
always told it takes at least 3 years.
yeah. So no, don't be we're not disappointed when a bill doesn't make it the first year.
No, it's to start the conversation.
Yeah, just a lot of people have to learn a lot of things. So what's that bill do? House bill?
Yes. So But first of all, I want to explain how the bill came to be, but it's also because our resolution, Missouri's
Right.
really been strong on this issue. But in Texas, they passed a bill 2 years ago, and they had victims speak at that event, and there was some people there who heard the testimony, and they're actually behind. It's a think tank called State Armor. They actually initiated bills in several states, including Missouri. And I was very happy about that, to get involved in that and find the witnesses to testify. And we did testify at the hearing last year, and the bill was attached to a human trafficking bill, and it made it all the way to the Senate, almost to the Senate floor. So I'm pleased with the progress. This year, we've actually already had our hearing. It was very powerful, again, with the witness testimony, and it's already passed out of committee. So we're making very good progress, better than last year progress. It's already been passed out of the Health and Mental Health Committee. And there's a lot more awareness about that the organ harvesting is happening on a state sanctioned level. It's not just black market trade, and how it's affecting Missourians. So what the bill would do is actually keeps people from using state funded insurance to go to China. But ultimately, it's letting people know that if they think about going to China for an organ, it's going to be likely coming from an innocent person. And so we feel very concerned about our Missouri citizens. We don't want anyone to feel the pain of regret, to be accomplices to murder. And we don't want our medical personnel to be involved in training surgeons who are using their skills for murder. There's a lot of implications as to why not only do we have people in Missouri that are affected by this and their families in China, but also it affects anyone who is, thinking about getting a transplant and thinking of going to China. And we know that it's happening. We don't have that kind of evidence because it's personal information. But in Texas, a doctor testified that one of his patients went to China for an organ. And Texas is just right nearby. It's happening everywhere. It's just not the kind of information we can get. But we're making great progress.
All right, very good.
Did you want to do your sponsors before we roll on?
Well, no, we'll just go ahead.
Okay.
We'll do sponsors last today. I think we're going to have time, so so Mary, you can do question number 6.
Well, okay, so the persecution of Falun Gong seems to be what led to these organ harvesting crimes. And we've established that it's not just Falun Gong. The communism in general is anti-faith because the government wants to be in the position of the provider, the god of everything, which is, for this show, Changing Times, for us, it's a matter of good and evil. And so can you describe some of the other groups involved, and can you explain what Falun Gong is and why the persecution of this group? When?
Is that the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's broader than just Falun Gong. You can go there first, but then Sara already said Falun Gong's probably the largest faith-based group. What's your experience with that?
So I really want to say, as someone grew up in China, we are very familiar with Communist Party's persecution towards people. Not only that the Communist Party is against the faith, they're also against education. Mm-hmm. My parents survived the Great Cultural Revolution. Mm-hmm. That was between 1966 and 1976. At that time, Chairman Mao saying, right, sort of like any education can make you think freely, and then you can criticize the government. So he shut down the whole education system in China. We're talking about for 10 years, China had no school, right? If you were supposed to go to elementary school in 1966, there was no elementary school. And after 10 years, you become 16 or 17, you need to go to work, right? Like you had no education. So that was how the Chinese government just shut down the whole education system to make people easier to be brainwashed, right? Of course, that was not sustainable. They had to stop the Cultural Revolution because the country's economy was collapsing. Within 10 years, they killed over 2 million intellectuals. And these were like doctors, like professors, engineers. Everyone who got education were taken to labor camps or work in the fields. And nowadays,
that was
although
part of
China,
getting rid of your history by getting rid
yes,
of the
getting rid
people
of history,
who can transmit that history. Yeah.
and also with the history, they got rid of the traditional value.
Yeah.
The traditional value, like say what is right, what is wrong. You're supposed to be honest. We're supposed to, serve your country, serve your, take care of your parents. All these traditional value were wiped out during the Cultural Revolution. And after the Cultural Revolution, although China resumed the school system, right, they still have very strong control. Like, for example, they distorted the textbook. They distorted the history. Like the history we learned in China, right, was the Communist Party's history of China. Like they distorted the history and like changed the history description into something like fit their propaganda. And they also have been controlling religions in China. Like, for example, you probably know Christians in China, they cannot read regular Bible. They have to read the Communist Party's version of Bible. They distorted the Bible, and you are only allowed to use the Communist government's Bible in Christian churches in China, right? If you American, right, Lynn, if you mail a copy of Bible to China, the one who received your mail received the American Bible is illegal. I mean, he can be arrested and sentenced to prison terms. And that was how they control religion. But they cannot do that to Falun Gong because Falun Gong is a meditation practice. Like people meditate at home. You don't need to register. You don't go to church or temple. It's like all your personal business. Like if you want to practice, it's your own business to practice. If you don't want to practice, it's your own business not to practice. So that's why they immediately put millions of Falun Gong to prison after they, realized like this is such a popular meditation with independent thinking. So Falun Gong, also known as Falun Dafa. Falun, the name means universe. Gong means energy, and Dafa means principle. So basically, this is just a meditation for better health, better, morality, be a better person. But this is actually independent from communism. If you understand that they can shut down the whole education system to enforce their propaganda, it's not hard to understand why they target all spiritual groups. Even a spiritual group like Falun Gong that's purely apolitical and peaceful and good for people's health. It's not difficult to understand. This is typical Communist Party, right? If they do not do this, that's something surprising to us because they would crack down any group that is independent from Communist Party whenever the group is grow large enough to make them feel the threat to their propaganda system.
And that's where this whole idea of political correctness comes from. It's actually a concept imported from communist China. You have to be politically correct to be accepted.
Yeah,
this is
like
very sad if you see.
Go ahead. First,
Sorry.
we'll finish with Wen, and then we'll get back to you, Sarah.
Yeah. Well, I want to quickly add about the number of the scale of persecution, right? So I want to list several numbers. In 2006, the United Nations had a special report about torture victims in China. They counted how many people, they had a sample of how many people tortured in labor camps and prisons. Who are they? 66% of torture victims in China were Falun Gong practitioners. That was 2006. And 2013, Amnesty International, in its annual report, stated in all the labor camps in China, the population of Falun Gong was between 30% to 100%. So some labor camps, 100% of them were Falun Gong practitioners. That was 2013. And in 2022, just 2 years ago, right, the annual report from U.S. State Department, they searched the prisoners of conscience detained in China, those innocent people detained in China for their, the dissidents, those who hold a different opinion. 79% of them were Falun Gong practitioners.
Right.
And also one thing you have to keep in mind, among the Falun Gong practitioners, about 3/4 of them were women. That was according to a government report done in China in 1998. They actually did a survey by the Chinese government to see who were practicing Falun Gong. 73% of the practitioners were women. And many of them were grandmas, right? Those who are between 60 to 90 years old. And if you see how many people in China are detained, I have seen reports of 90-year-old grandmas thrown into labor camps and sentenced to like prison for like several years. And that was unbelievable, the persecution in China to women and seniors.
Sarah, what was your comment?
Well, I'm a little concerned I might be stepping on your next question, but I just wanted to explain the climate in China before the persecution began, because Falun Gong actually isn't something new, really. It was passed down from ancient times and then made public in China in 1992. And the founder gave lectures across China, and a few thousand people learned it. But from there, it was a grassroots movement, and it was involved doing exercise, slow-moving exercises like Tai Chi or yoga. And it involved the teachings, which were about, like Wen mentioned, becoming a better person. And the core values were truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance. And a lot of people found that by incorporating that into their daily lives, looking inside instead of blaming others, they were becoming healthy. A lot of even serious diseases were going away. I have a friend who had MS go away in 6 months after she started practicing Falun Gong. And this was happening all across China. And the government at the time supported and even awarded Falun Gong during that time, because it actually reduced China's healthcare costs at a noticeable rate. It wasn't until later when they did the surveys, like Wen mentioned, there's no formal membership, so they had to do surveys to learn that, all across China, at all levels, even people in the government were practicing Falun Gong. They learned that there were 70 to 100 million people practicing Falun Gong. And like Lynn mentioned at the beginning, that's more than there are Communist Party members. And that's when they started to suppress it and eventually ban it.
That's scary for me because since the Obama administration, there was this huge influx of money for social emotional learning. And part of that framework for social emotional learning was collecting data on your attitudes, values, and mindsets, and not only of the students in the classroom, but of the families as well. So what they don't know by registration and certification and licensure, they can find out through these surveys. And innocent children who are just following their classroom assignments are going to be reporting on what should be a private, an issue of private conscience. So I just see, this is what Lily Tang Williams, I spoke to Wen about her. I've met Lily Tang Williams, who's now in New Hampshire, and she's run for Congress several times. But she was also from China, and when she saw this whole Common Core movement roll out, she said, "Oh, I recognize this." And there have been several national speakers. They didn't come to this country to be national speakers against Common Core, but once they saw it roll out, they had to speak out because they said what they experienced in the Cultural Revolution over there is now coming here, and they're doing it through the schools. So that's kind of a scary thought for me.
Yeah, not only that, but now with the persecution in China, if you, at your company, your boss will come to you and say, "Do you still practice Falun Gong?" And if you say yes, they'll send you to a brainwashing center.
Right.
And if you still refuse to give up Falun Gong, they'll send you to prison and torture you and ask you to sign statements, and worse.
For correction, right? For correction.
Right.
Wen, as someone who grew up in China, tell us what the Chinese people's response to this is. Do they have power to stop this from within?
I would say the movement in China, like there's a huge human rights movement started after the persecution towards Falun Gong, because Communist Party usually would target less than 5% of population and tell the rest of the population, say, you should join the government and persecute that minority, right? Most people would remain silent towards injustice to protect themselves. But the Falun Gong practitioners, because they believe in truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, so they stepped out to speak for their fellow practitioners who were detained. So, of course, this has greatly changed the Chinese society in the past 20 years. Nowadays in China, we see many, many people stepping out to speak out for Falun Gong. especially I want to mention the human rights lawyers, because in China, lawyers were not allowed to defend their victims, like the dissidents, as not guilty. You may think it's a joke, but see, like if you are Falun Gong or underground Christian, if you're arrested, the government would appoint a lawyer to defend you. The lawyer can only defend you as guilty. But nowadays, there are thousands of human rights lawyers in China openly defended Falun Gong as not guilty. And also they helped Falun Gong practitioners, like, in their courts, and help to educate them to gain knowledge about the legal system in China. But unfortunately, these lawyers themselves also face persecution. Like oftentimes, like the court would adjourn and say, okay, let's arrest a lawyer and then come back to the court. But despite all this threatening from the Chinese government, we are seeing many, many Chinese people speaking out, like besides lawyers, many ordinary people, like they also start to sign petitions to help Falun Gong practitioners, call for the release of their friends who were detained. Yes, that's definitely a huge change in China. But at the same time, many Chinese people are still very brainwashed because it all depends on how awakening you are, right? Like, if you can access information, if you personally know Falun Gong practitioners, it's likely they will awake from this propaganda system. But if you bury themselves inside the bubble of propaganda, refuse to see the truth, then they still become very, very brainwashed. But I would say overall, the Chinese society is awakening from the propaganda,
That's
which
encouraging.
is very, very encouraging.
So, what can the regular citizens in the United States do to help with mitigating, with challenging this forced organ harvesting? What can we do as normal citizens? Sarah, can you go first? Or go ahead. I mean,
yeah,
you
go
are
ahead,
one
Sarah.
who's doing it here in the United States.
Yes,
so
sure.
we'll just,
But if Wen can go first, because she was
Oh,
about
okay.
to talk.
Go
That's
ahead.
fine.
Okay, I just
Wen?
quickly mention, I think raising awareness
Uh-huh.
is definitely the most important. I remember like back in 2016, right? People didn't even believe that organ harvesting is happening. But I remember there was one guy who heard my talk, started to tell his friends and talk about this in his parties. And, I think these are amazing work. Like just like you talk to your friends and family at your private parties, when you chat, hey, how people get organs in China. If you go to China to replace organ, what's going to happen? Like even these small efforts can help. Like this is how we accumulated awareness in the past years. And of course, nowadays it's become much easier, right? Like Sarah and I, we belong to an online Rotary Club that we have been holding film screenings all over the world, right? In different cities, like in California, in Washington State, in Missouri, and we can hold film screenings. There were several documentaries about organ harvesting in China, and one of the newest ones called State Organs. You can watch it on Amazon. And there are people holding backyard film screenings to show this documentary to their friends and families. So all these efforts can help.
Excellent. Sarah?
Yeah, and I just want to say that I remember how I felt when I was 10 years old and learning about the Holocaust. And I remember very clearly thinking, how could we let this happen? How could good people let this happen to people? And when I learned about Falun Gong and the organ harvesting, I realized this is happening again. And when our torture victim spoke, she was tortured in a labor camp. She was only 19 years old. She almost died. And the guard said, "Just let her die because we'll just count it as a suicide." That was the policy by the Communist Party. She survived to tell her story. And at the end of her speech, she said that organ harvesting is a crime so great that it requires every one of us to do something. Now with social media, we can go type in organ harvesting and Falun Gong persecution. There's great videos. Share it on your social media. Contact your state legislator if you're used to doing that, or even if you're not, and both of our senators and your congressmen, and ask them to support the Falun Gong Protection Act or any bills related to stopping forced organ harvesting. That is going to go a long way. If we can pass the law, it's going to really make a big difference. The Chinese government, like Wen explained, is doing everything in their power to stop it. And another thing is recently they have been escalating their persecution outside of China and targeting the artistic arm of Falun Gong, which is the Shenyun Performing Arts. It's a beautiful Chinese dance and performing arts group.
We have them in Branson.
If you want to defy, yes, they came to Springfield. If you want to defy the Communist Party, go see that show. They are bringing back traditional Chinese culture, and they are standing up for freedom for all people. The show is very popular, very beautiful. Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas went to see it at the Kennedy Center last year and said it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. But this year, the Kennedy Center had bomb threats from the Communist Party when the show was about to perform there. And we had a bomb threat here in St. Louis before our show this last weekend from the Communist Party agents, trying to get people not to see this show because they don't want people to return to traditional values because it's opposed to Communist Party values. So they are increasing their efforts to stop, Shenyun and stop Falun Gong's voice around the world.
There's an organization called Victims of Communism, and a couple of years ago they opened an office in St. Louis because of the concentration of the communist influence up there. And that is the organization that will host Lily Tang Williams. Anybody could invite Lily to come and speak anywhere in the country, and Victims of Communism will pay for her travel expenses. All they ask is that you have 30 people in the audience, and you can learn more about what the tragedy of violation of human rights is in China from people who lived there and saw it firsthand or experienced it themselves. So thank you so much. Lynn.
Hey, so I tell you what, ladies, both Sarah and Wen, you just are great difference makers, and I appreciate you so much. Mary, and I appreciate you so much being on. We have two sponsors. We're about out of time, but I want to just briefly mention our two sponsors that make this show possible. The first one is Brad Pistow, Certified Fiduciary Financial Planner, right in Ozark, Missouri. And he is one of the best, not only in the state of Missouri, he's a tremendous financial advisor for retirement planning all over the country. He writes articles for Wall Street, USA Today, all kinds of different magazines and newspapers. He speaks all over the country, just like Wen, you do, and Sarah. I mean, he is out everywhere letting people know about retirement planning. It's never too early to think about retirement planning. He's licensed in several states. He has associates in all 50 states. Call him, 417-581-9222, 417-581-9222, and you can get more information. It does not cost him anything to talk to him, and he can help you with retirement planning. I use him, my family, many friends, business people I know, and he will make sure that you never run out of money before you run out of life. The other sponsor that we have, a great sponsor, is Youngblood Kia, Youngblood Nissan, Springfield Nissan, Springfield Kia. Used to be Youngblood Motors. That's John Whitaker and Aaron Swanson, the general manager. We'll have all these sponsors on our show this spring soon because we want to bring them on and let people know what they do. But again, tremendous car dealer, one of the oldest car dealers in Southwest Missouri. They sell cars in more states, not just Missouri, and they specialize in Nissan and Kia, and they specialize in certified cars. So a lot of people can't afford to buy a new car, but and used cars are usually cheaper. But a certified car will go down the road many, many more miles than just a used car because they really do a 110-point inspection and make sure that car is just like a new car when you buy it. So two great guys, one in Ozark, Missouri, one in Springfield, Missouri, and they're just tremendous. We recommend it. But ladies, thank you very much. We'll be back next week with another great show. And we appreciate everybody listening. The thing you can do today just like this lady said, share this show. Tell people how to see this show, and make sure church groups, different groups that you belong to, sees this show. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you, and
you.
God bless.